Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. He has been called Hamlet on the Hudson, a partisan brawler, the conscience of America. He served as governor of New York longer than anyone else in the state's history. At the 1984 Democratic Convention, he delivered one of the great pieces of American political rhetoric. He resisted the urge to seek the presidency and turned down a nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court. He is at home both in the realm of ideas and the grubby world of politics. He's a longtime Lincoln scholar who just completed his second book on the 16th American president. He's Mario Cuomo, and he's here to talk about Lincoln and Bush and Kerry, the 2004 election, Iraq, religion, gay marriage, tax cuts and class warfare, and a lot more. Welcome back, Governor.
Thanks for
It's
having
always a pleasure. Let's begin with the Lincoln book, Why Lincoln Matters Today More Than Ever, written with Harold Holzer, the noted Lincoln scholar. In the book, if you look at the table of contents, Lincoln as political scripture, Lincoln's wisdom for today, and then you've got 8 issues: war, civil liberties, role of government, opportunity, global interdependence, religion, the Supreme Court, and race. And you put them, Lincoln, in a contemporary context. Let's start with Lincoln himself. What is it about Lincoln that makes him so iconic to politicians all across the political spectrum in the United States? Why?
Well, I think you start in exactly the right place, Doug. The first part of the book is Lincoln as the universal icon of Democrats and Republicans. And so President Clinton, we sent him our first Lincoln book. We put it on the bedstand. He was a Lincoln scholar. President Bush, Lincoln scholar. President Bush's father, Lincoln scholar. Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, Lincoln scholar. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, everybody's with Lincoln. That's number one. Everybody's not with Jefferson. Everybody's not with Washington. They don't even count as contemporary sources of information and inspiration. And this is something that I understood for a long time. We did the book Lincoln on Democracy some years ago, and I'd been asked over and over to do another book on Lincoln. I said, look, I'm not really a Lincoln historian. I'm not going to do Lincoln's speeches, Lincoln's shoes, Lincoln's debates. I said, I'd need something else. And I got it on the memorial, on the occasion of the first memorial of 9/11. Just before that, a newspaper called and said, if you were still governor, what would you say about 9/11 on this first memorial? And I said, wow, what a daunting prospect that is. You'd need to interpret this event. You'd need to do more than just mourn. You'd need to say, this is what it means. This is how we have to address it. I said, I don't know, that's tough. And a few days later, we had the memorial, and 3 politicians appeared: Pataki, Bloomberg, and Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor, the current mayor, and the
And then the governor of New Jersey as well.
And none of them spoke
their
own words.
Right.
They did read Lincoln. And thinking about that after it, I said, what they're saying is that Lincoln was a better source of ideas and inspiration on this occasion than they were. And that means he is the ultimately relevant former politician.
Excuse me, let me just interrupt for a second, though. Doesn't this show an appalling lack of leadership, that we don't develop our own Lincolns? Where are today's Lincolns? I mean, that's a peripheral question. I don't want to digress, but I was really appalled by the fact that they used others' words and did not come up with their own expressions on the day. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, it's a good interruption, and I think it's a valid question. Now, the first question you asked is why Lincoln, and what is his relevance and what makes him relevant? First of all, the Bible is relevant. The founding fathers are relevant. Plato is relevant. A lot of what happened in the past is still relevant because it has a wisdom that transcends. It has an intelligence that is timeless. That's what Lincoln was as well. And Lincoln, more than any other politician, is cited and quoted. Why? It's the nature of his intelligence. Now, why don't we produce Lincolns? I think in fairness to this generation and in fairness to history, you have to give some credit to martyrdom for some of these people. Lincoln, had he not been killed, what would Lincoln have been then? Very hard to say. But it's clear that his martyrdom, being killed in 1865, created an immediate myth. He immediately became an historically religious figure, which he was not truly in life. John Kennedy. What would John Kennedy have been if he hadn't been killed? Very hard to say. Very hard to say whether he would have had a Lyndon Johnson record or not with the Congress, etc. And so to some extent, what made Lincoln was his martyrdom, but that only to a small extent. What really makes Lincoln is the breadth, the depth of his philosophy. He thought in large, large dimensions, and he spoke to the whole world forever. He was constantly speaking about the future and what we mean to the ages and what democracy means to the ages. Now this, Doug, is fantastic considering he had 1 year of formal education. 1 year. And the rest of the time he did it by reading. Got to be a lawyer by reading, et cetera, et cetera. So he was a fabulously intelligent person, freakishly intelligent. And he was a great speaker. Not always, but most of the time a great speaker. He wrote like an angel when he chose to. And so you combine all those things plus his martyrdom, and he speaks to the ages. Right now, the one biggest complaint I and most of us would have about our own politicians is, where are the big ideas? What do you stand for?
Right.
What are you telling me? What do we do with these Muslims who hate us so much they'd give up their own life? How do you deal with them? You're telling me to kill them in wars. Great, you kill them and it produces more terrorists. You know, give us a bigger idea. We don't understand. We want to be inspired. We want to be moved. Lincoln is capable of that. So far, our current politicians are not.
And they suffer dramatically in the contrast. And we as a people suffer by the lack of leadership as well.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, back to your question, why? Maybe it has something to do with what we're doing now. Maybe it has something to do with television. Maybe it has to do with electronics, radio. Maybe it has to do with the fact that there is so much information saturating the public awareness and consciousness. People are capable of developing such huge amounts of knowledge that they don't respect the politician the way they used to. Maybe familiarity breeds contempt. I don't know, but I suspect it has something to do with the new age of information.
Right. The politician is no longer extraordinary because they're so immediate.
Exactly.
Okay. You indicate that Lincoln, in a sense, throws down a gauntlet, poses a challenge to this generation. What is this challenge, and is it unique to this generation? What's the challenge?
Tell us what you believe in ultimately. What do you believe in? You know, I used to do this in talking to groups about this, the idea of a big idea. You ought to have a philosophy for your own life. You ought to be able to tell yourself, you know, what am I? I don't know how long I'm going to be around here. What's the purpose of being around? If my life is a basket of appetites, you know, and I love basketball, and so I'll keep watching games, and I love women, so I'll keep doing that, and wine, and great. Well, that basket's going to fall apart, and your ability to fill it up as you get older is going to. So what are you? What do you believe in? What is the big idea? Lincoln answered that question by going to the Declaration of Independence and saying, look, your Constitution doesn't tell you what you are as a people. It tells you you're free. That's all your Constitution tells you. It doesn't say you should love one another. It doesn't say you're a community. It doesn't say you should get to be the strongest place in the world by helping one another, by bringing in immigrants, by taking care of poor people, by educating everybody. It doesn't say that. Declaration of Independence, however, says that, you know, we have the inalienable right to equality and to life, et cetera, et cetera. Add the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution. Give yourself a firm, a positive obligation to work together to share benefits and burdens to make yourselves stronger. Incidentally, This is important because this democratic idea is brand new, this country we have. Now, he was only 1848, he started speaking thereabouts. He spoke actually before that. So we were still a young country. And he said, if this thing works, it will work for the world. And if it fails, it will fail for the world. So he was a very big, big thinker. He also happened to get rid of slavery on the way, which gave him a huge achievement, which came belatedly, and it wasn't his original purpose, but it did happen. And so he achieved largely, kept the Union together miraculously, and made us what we are today.
So he takes the two great documents of the American civil religion and produces a third, the Gettysburg Address.
Exactly.
So, but one of the things that seems to be absent in today's America is this notion of a civil religion. We'll talk about sectarian religion in a little bit, but what we seem to be missing is this preacher of an American civil religion. We seem to have lost that glue that holds us together. You call it this overarching grand concept. You tell, what is the overarching grand concept?
What I used to do at speeches is say, look, I happen to be a Roman Catholic, and so I can take out of my pocket what I call the creed. Now, it's either the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, and I will tell you in 20 seconds or maybe a minute what I am. I believe in God the Father Almighty, and run through it. And it has all my basic beliefs as a Catholic. And I can put it down and say, that's it. I'll never read another book. That's everything. Now try to do that as an American. You write it. You write 2 minutes.
No, I'm making you the head of the new civil religion.
But the answer is, there is none. You cannot say as an American, here's what I believe. You can do one line for sure. You can say, I believe in freedom and liberty, the maximum amount that an ordered society can tolerate. Yes, that you can say. That's what we are. We believe basically in freedom, and we hedge it. But well, beyond that, do you believe in the idea of family? We're all in this together. Well, the lack of compassion became respectable in the Reagan years. You became a mushy-headed liberal if you said, hey, look, we're all doing pretty well. What about those people who are not? Through no fault of their own. Don't we have an obligation to them? Don't a lot of us claim to be religious? So what are we as a people? We started the Bush era, the second Bush era, and the president said virtually he wasn't going to mess with the rest of the world.
Right. No entangling alliances. Went back to Washington.
We're going to do our own thing.
Forget
We're going to be the hegemon. We're going to be the big leader, period. We don't need the United Nations. We're not going to pay our dues. Don't bother us in Africa. We don't want to come and solve your problems. No nation building. That's where we started. So what he was saying is, what are we? The biggest guy on the block who doesn't need anybody else. Really? What are we now? Well, now we're building nations. Now we're trying to make democracies. What are we? We are confused. That's why somebody like Lincoln can be helpful to us.
Okay. Now, you disagree with Lincoln in certain respects. Particularly, I would think that Lincoln's stand on the Patriot Act might be different than you might have preferred him to be. I mean, if you look at the case of Ex parte Milligan, the suspension of habeas corpus, if I were in the Bush camp, I would look to Lincoln as a role model there. So I think that, I mean, you, Mario Cuomo, take Lincoln in the sense he becomes a liberal icon, and I could see conservatives adopting, a modern conservative adopting some of his stances as part of their legacy.
The one thing I say about labels is that they're both stupid, because liberal doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
What was Clinton? Was he liberal? No. Was he conservative? Sometimes. So these words don't really mean anything.
He sounds like a Democrat. I'm sorry.
I think, and Democrat doesn't mean anything. If it meant anything, why would people call themselves New Democrats? If Democrat described them, why do they have to be a New Democrat as distinguished from Cuomo, an old Democrat?
He's not Bush.
The label don't apply to him. He was a Whig. What's a Whig? It's a thing you put on your head when you don't have hair. So he was a Whig, became a Republican. What did the Republicans believe? They were against slavery. What did the Democrats believe? Today's liberals. They were for slavery. So forget the labels. He's not label prone. He was a progressive pragmatist. He was very progressive. He was changing things. He changed slavery. But he was pragmatic about what he did. Now, He was certainly pragmatic about the way he read the Constitution. And because it was so important to him to keep the states together in one union, if he had a blink over the Constitution the way Roosevelt did, the way Bush is doing now, they all do the same thing, the presidents. When they're in trouble, basic trouble, and they feel they need more authority, then they play games with the Constitution. With respect to Lincoln and habeas corpus, I've never been convinced that he needed to do that, and I wish he hadn't. With respect to Ashcroft, I think it becomes a balancing question. We want to get all the terrorists. We have to protect ourselves. That's very important to protect ourselves against terrorists. Yes. And so we want to give ourselves as much authority to search, etc. On the other hand, we don't. So you have to balance. Ashcroft has his thumb on the scale. That's what's wrong with Ashcroft, I think, and that's what was wrong with Lincoln. So I disagree with Lincoln on that point, on the habeas corpus point, and some other things he did during the Civil War.
Okay, let's talk about some of the 8 issues that you deal with through Lincoln in the book. Let's start with religion and the problem of religion. We know that the founders both saw religion as a source of tyranny and oppression as well as character building, and they tried to balance it. We have a president that is extraordinarily religious in his orientation and almost messianic in his politics. Where is the role of religion, and have in a sense we exceeded those bounds?
You need really to define religion. Religion is the main subject, well, one of the main subjects in the First Amendment. Religion, however, is different from God. The word God is not used in the Constitution at all. It's not really used in the Declaration of Independence either. Nature's God is used in the Declaration of Independence. Let's put that to one side. So, what is God? Well, most of the religions that have a God say you can't define the God. And if you look at Black's Law Dictionary and you look up God, there is no definition of God. And the Jewish people won't even write the name out because it's ineffable. It can't be explained. Religion, however, is something else. Religion is a set of rules, prescriptions, permissions, doctrines.
Shall nots.
You can have shall nots and shalls. You can have one religion, you're a Muslim. I have another religion, I'm a Jew. That's a problem. Why? Because there may be collisions in what I believe the society should do and you believe the society should do. The Founding Fathers were smart enough to know that. They knew that people came here to be free in their religion. The Catholics went to Maryland, a lot of the Protestants went to the Northeast. And so the first point was religion's important to a lot of our people. We want them to be free to exercise their religion. We put that in the First Amendment. You're free to exercise your religion. Now, to make certain that they stay free, we're going to say to the government, don't you ever try to create a religion, because if you create your own religion, then it's either going to be his or Mario's, and then they're going to have a fight.
Right.
So you can't establish a religion. So to keep religion free and sacrosanct, they said, you have a right to it. You can do anything you want in your own religious life except hurt somebody else with it, and the government will not mess with it. Now, has the government established any religions? Not really. So far, so good. Do they cross the line? Well, if you take the constitutional law, it's very eccentric. It goes this way and that way. We're about to have a big decision on the Pledge of Allegiance.
Right.
Does it cross the line to say, I pledge allegiance under God? You know, my guess, forget about it. Supreme Court's not going to take God out.
No.
How will they rationalize it? Doesn't make any difference. They'll think of something.
Right.
But they're going to leave God there. Why? Well, if you can't define God anyway, how's it going to hurt you? You know, that will be their basic mentality. But
there is a pervasive interplay of religion and politics, and increasingly so in the Bush administration. That you've got this matrix of issue: abortion, assisted suicide, faith-based initiatives. But with Bush, you've got something else: this sense of almost messianic mission. When we listen to that press conference and then we read the Woodward book, there seems to be this belief that there is almost a divine plan here in this manifest destiny has got somehow the will of God behind it. This sounds dangerous. Or am I overreacting?
No, you're not overreacting. If you told me that you'd like to be president and then you whispered to me, Mario, I'd make a good president because God talks to me, I would be very nervous about you. There's no question about that. But all it would be is an alert. I'd be alert then to see what you do with this messianic message. And all that counts is what policies you propose. And so that's how we're going to measure you. Is the policy you're proposing good for all of us in this society, some of whom are agnostic, some of whom are atheists, some of whom are fallen away Catholics or Muslims? We're all kinds of believers and non-believers. And now you come at us with a policy. I don't care that it's your religious policy, as long as it's good for all of us. And so you tell me you don't believe in murder. Great. That's a policy I can live with. What else? Well, I don't believe in that. When you get to policies that are only religious, and cannot be rationalized in a secular sense for a non-religious or a-religious or varied religious community, that's when you're in trouble. Here, let me give you the perfect example. Abortion is a good example. Another one is stem cells. Okay.
Please.
The scientific evidence that if you take an embryonic stem cell, that's from an embryo, and you take the stem cell out, it might help you with Alzheimer's disease, etc. All the scientists are really hot on this subject. And so they want to take embryos, take the stem cells out. If it's an old, you can get stem cells that are from adults, they're not as good. So Nancy Reagan has just taken the position, conservative Republican, because of her husband and Alzheimer's, the president. She says, you ought to allow that. President Bush says no. The Catholic Church says no. The evangelicals say no. Many fundamental. On what theory? And here's the interesting point. They say life begins at conception. When the seed comes together, you have life immediately. And so that is life, that embryo. And when you take the stem cell out, you're killing life. It's exactly the Catholic theory against abortion. No woman can have an abortion to save her own life. Why? Because as soon as they come together, from the moment of conception, it's life. Now, question, is that a scientific fact? Here's what John Marburger, the ethicist who's in charge of President Bush's panel of bioethicists, and I know him because he worked at Shoreham for me. He says, that's not a scientific issue, that's a sacred question. In other words, it's a religious principle. Now, the Catholics used to teach years ago, in the time of Ambrose and Aquinas and Jerome, they used to teach life begins after 40 days. Right. And some people believed life begins after 15 days. Now the church says life begins at conception. Now, the church, Bishop Myers in New Jersey recently referred to that as, well, science tells us that. Science doesn't tell you that at all. All the scientists are saying, no, like Roe against Wade doesn't tell you that either. Roe against Wade says viability, the ability to have life begins after 24 weeks, and that's why you can't have abortions. So this is a perfect example. The president's position is basically religious. I'm a Roman Catholic, you're a Roman Catholic. Our religious belief imposed upon us by the church, but we accept it or we get out of the church, is life begins at conception. So this religious principle, if the president pushes that religious principle on a society that rejects it for the most part, including, frankly, most of the Catholic or many of the Catholics, that's when you get into trouble. When you're trying to make your religion my civil law, and I don't accept your religion, and that's the only rationale for your proposition. Did I foul that up?
No, I think it's a reasonable stand. Let's take though the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church recently, several bishops have told Catholic politicians that they can't receive communion because of their stands on abortion. They did it to John Kerry, they did it to McGreevey, and in fact, I believe a state legislator in New York left the church because of the inextricable conflict the church put him into. The church is playing in politics.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the official was Mr. Kenney, who was the majority leader of the Jersey.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. But the point is well taken. let's talk about that. Number one, and we should be clear on the question. Does the church, the Catholic Church, or the Protestant churches, whichever, or the Muslims, do they have the right as religions to discipline their own members?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And so, you know, if the bishop tells me or you or somebody else, you can't do this, I won't give you communion, that's between us and the bishop, our church. The church has a perfect right to say whatever it wants. We have a perfect right to quit or whatever. The more difficult question is, how should the rest of the society react to that? Well, here's what would happen, Doug. The church, and if you read the Catholic Encyclopedia out of Notre Dame, there's a wonderful church and state presentation which describes this very simply.
And I remember a speech that you gave at that same university on this similar topic.
That was a long time ago, right. But the church has always taken the same position on this issue as to when our religion must become your civil law. They don't do it on every issue. They didn't do it on slavery. They don't do it on the death penalty. They don't do it on the principle of just war. They don't even do it on contraceptives. We are taught, as I'm sure you recall, that we can't use contraceptives because it violates the natural law, the law of reason. Okay, well then why aren't they saying, if any of you people put contraceptives in the budget, even for kids who are making more children than they should, you're out of the church? I don't know, you'll have to ask the church. Okay. So they're very selective. They do it where they think it is prudential. Now, they've chosen to do it on abortion. That's their choice. But if the church was serious about this, it would have to do it on all the major issues. And if you did it on all the major issues, you would never elect a good Catholic to anything. You couldn't, because they would only a theocracy, a Catholic theocracy would mean anything to them. So and you'd be in this position. If the Catholic Church insists on this and presses it, then when you see a Catholic candidate, your first question should be, are you a good Catholic? And when he says, I'm Doug Muzzio, I'm a heck of a Catholic, then how do I know what you'll believe the day after I elect you if the bishops have a meeting?
Right.
And so that's the old John Kennedy. That's why I think most bishops are not doing this. That's why I think Cardinal McCarrick, who is in charge of the task force to decide how to handle this, has said, I'm not going to make a statement until after the election. I think most of the bishops are correct on this issue.
Okay.
Now, when I say correct, I think they're wiser than the bishops who are seeking to punish people for not doing what they say on one issue.
Okay. That closes this week. You're coming back. Next week, we're going to talk 9/11 hearings, gay marriage, Kerry and the Dems, Cuomo's 2004 Democratic Convention speech, and Iraq. So we will be back. Thank you very much.